community, Getting Started, which will feature the town of Bristol's experience and lessons learned with bringing broadband to their town, as well as advice for other communities on how to get started with broadband. So I just like to have our speakers introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. Can you hear us okay?
We can, yes.
Great. So my name is Nick Coates. I'm the town administrator for the town of Bristol. I am also the chair of the Grafton County Broadband Committee. And because I apparently like to have no free time, I am now also an elected selectman in the town of Campton. So, and ran on the idea of bringing broadband to our community. So I've been doing this broadband work for about 3 years and working with Kevin for the last year.
Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Gwynn. I'm with the director of the Northeast for EX2 Technology. We're a full service consulting, design, build, and P3 network communication deployer. I've been in the industry approximately 27 years and have built and designed networks across the country from West Coast and the Midwest and in the East Coast, predominantly in the Northeast.
Okay, great.
There we go. Great.
All right.
All right, Jennifer, you want me to jump in or?
Sure, if you want to get started on broadband.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that the reason why we got started, the town of Bristol got started on broadband was really for a couple of different reasons. One is that we had a focus area on sort of improving livability in the community. And we got started back in 2017, 2018, before COVID was even a thing. And we were thinking about a lot of these different things. So livability as a community of about 3,000 by census, and then 6,000 during daytime with the regional school district and employers. And then also about a community of 10,000 in the summertime. We were looking at how do we become a more livable community. We looked at also economic development. How do we really focus in on bringing business here in a responsible manner and kind of being attuned to the needs of the businesses that are starting to move here, and really municipal operations. So trying to stabilize municipal operations. We have sort of the generic internet connection that we have now that many communities get through their franchise agreement. And so we were looking at how do we take that next step and how do we bring more options to the table for our community members. So really at the end of the day, it's about sort of bringing 21st century infrastructure and providing it to our residents and to our municipal operations, and really trying to make sure that we have a community where people want to live and work. So that's our focus area, and what we saw as the value is really trying to make that our community better through that. So in terms of our history, like I said, we got started, originally the conversation started with trying to improve cell coverage here. We have a lack of decent cell phone coverage in town. There's a lot of spottiness. We actually did a mapping exercise with Layton Region Planning Commission and had the different carriers map out the different carriers' cell coverage. We had known that cell coverage was pretty spotty here, but we actually mapped it out and kind of quantified that, and that really made us realize that we've got to do something. And what we realized is that the lack of
good.
It was Dennis.
Okay. So the lack of cell coverage in town was against our goals, what we were trying to do. So we quantified that, and then we realized that the important thing to do relating to cell coverage is having a backbone of fiber, because that's really where it comes from, is that connection ultimately has to get backhauled from a fiber optic cable connection. So having known that we have sort of lacking broadband access and lacking cell coverage access, it was a dual problem that was connected. We realized that we needed to go out.
It just got stuck, honey.
So we needed to solve that issue together. And then at the same time, we were also looking at how do we make sure that we have broadband coverage for telehealth and remote school? Because we have a medical center here in town, and then we have a regional school district. So what it all came back to is that we need better broadband coverage. And so what we figured is we could either try to partner with the existing providers in town, or we could go out and we could build the system such as it would serve the needs that we felt were important to us and not just be handed to a system that a provider wanted to provide to us. So we went down this road of going after grants and municipal appropriation at town meeting to build a backbone fiber network and then to build out from there. Again, the idea is to serve the needs of our residents and our visitors and come up with the solutions that were driven by us versus a company that was really focused in on how do they maximize return on investment. And because we're still a rural community, the return on investment wasn't there. So the justification for expanding didn't make sense from them. And it was the same sort of response with the cell carriers. The return on investment didn't make sense for them. And so they didn't invest in Bristol. And so what we figured is we've got to take the bull by the horns and do it ourselves. There's a few other things, but I think I'll turn it over to Kevin to kind of have him explain some of the things that we've worked on related to these topics, and then maybe some other experiences that he's had around with other municipalities.
Yeah, so just to kind of add on to what Nick was saying, as the project manager for the design build portion of the network, when we came on board was September of last year, and had a tight time frame related to the grant funding that Nick had, which was a blend of the CARES Act funding and the NDRC grant that he had. And so in that time frame, we had to move forward with the partnerships we had with NHEC to focus on the one area in relation to the fiber to the home component, but really look at the network as a whole. As Nick mentioned, it was looking at, how we can support the various services in town, bringing broadband into the town of a better quality and level for residents and businesses, as well as for his municipal services. And looking at that, taking what his history was and what he was focused on, and working with him and collaborating on how that network was going to go. So as we were starting to, go for pole license applications and do the design, that's when we looked at how we were going to develop the design for the fiber to the home portion for residential and commercial, and then also how his municipal services would be, and have come up with where the network is now, where there's a hybrid component where he'll have the capability for future growth from the municipal separate of the fiber to the home for the residential and consumer piece. And in talking about, value of broadband, I know everybody on the phone has definitely, we've all felt this everywhere in regards to after COVID. It's really put another flash of light back on it again. I know, there was a focus, and I've seen the focus of especially in rural broadband back in 2008, 2009, 2011 during the ERA funding, and built a lot of networks out, but they still weren't getting the last mile component. And that's been happening since that point. And we've had things like CAP funding and the RDOF and all these other pieces. And now we have more focus going into the infrastructure built here in the future. So we definitely see that need. You see it for education, you see it for your business growth within the towns, as well as telemedicine. I mean, all of us can probably have had some experience where we've already had our doctor's appointments online and having that now. So it's gone from not just looking at a corporation or a business coming in and needing high broadband to handle, files and large files or any other type of things at their office within the town structure. It's now each and every one of us that's working from home or starting a business from home. So it's really opened up the need, and what Nick has done here in Bristol has set that up for that growth factor with a future growth process through the rest of the town, accessing additional, looking at additional grant funding to look for further expansion.
I'll just say the last thing I'll say regarding this slide is just that the way in which we went about this is that we decided that we were going to build a backbone. So backbone sort of equivalent to what you hear with middle mile. So the highway, and then in addition to the highway, we were also doing sort of last mile with the funding that we received as well. And so we are essentially a partner. We're going to end up partnering with an internet service provider to provide the other parts of the last mile as well, and trying to figure out those last sort of mile solutions in a public-private partnership aspect. So we built the backbone, the middle mile highway, and then also a good portion of a couple of our neighborhoods to get to the actual homes, and then looking to partner with an ISP for those other final connections. Jennifer, do you want to take us to the next slide?
Yep. And we just got a couple questions in the chat, which I'll just pose right now. We have one question that asks, will you talk about ballpark estimates for CapEx, maybe dollars per mile plus cost per premise, and OpEx, dollars per customer?
You want to touch on that, or?
Yeah, you want to handle that one, or? I mean, basically, I mean, I'm not quite sure. Yeah.
Then breaking down on the cost per mile, that varies. Being from the aerial to whether it's aerial or buried, being in the rural areas, the bulk of this stuff will be on aerial infrastructure. That cost per mile can range in anywhere from 45,000 a mile to 55,000 a mile, or maybe more. It's also going to depend on what the make-ready costs are on the poles. So, for example, here in Bristol, the area that we were in, the make-ready was not as heavy as when you get in closer to your town locations, where you have a lot of the more older infrastructure with the older copper and older pole sizes that are up there. So that's kind of where the average is there. And then in regards to the cost per home, that can range in that $2,000 to $4,000 range per home when you spread it out. And that's, again, it varies depending on how many homes you're passing per mile. And that's where, if you look at, and we'll just take Bristol, for example, that homes passed, even still rural application, but as you get farther away from, I call it town proper area, that's when you get into the spots where you're having, 4 homes, 4 to 10 homes a mile. So it kind of ranges, and it's going to be different depending on the town itself and how far the homes are separated. And that's where, these grant programs and that is where that is, has been needed in order to offset those costs to provide the proper return on investment. And as Nick said, he's going to be partnering with an ISP, and where the value is there is that the grant funding helped, bridge that gap in the cost to build out the infrastructure and bring them on, and where they're going to have more focus on the cost related to the drop portion of it and the electronics on the for the home, as compared to having to put out the backbone and the distribution portion of it. Anything to add? Or?
Kevin hit it exactly right.
Okay, great. So as far as getting ready, it's clear that expanding broadband benefits our communities. Kind of what advice do you give other communities on how to get ready for a broadband project?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I can say just overall is being super flexible. We kind of went in with an expectation, of how we were going to build it, and that we were going to be able to do it very quickly. And what we soon realized is that there's a lot of things that you think you can do or think you want to do, but you really can't, or you have to think through some more. So I think flexibility is really key. Like I said, we started this journey, I think 3-4 years ago, and we're finally getting to the point where we're getting our projects finished up on the construction. I would just say that generally. And there's a lot of different models. And within New Hampshire, there's probably kind of been a couple different models of how communities have started to tackle this. When we started, there was not the funding availability in terms of bonding from the authority for a municipality to go out and bond and then partner with an internet service provider. So we didn't have that option available to us. So we actually went the route of going to town meeting for an appropriation, and then we took that money and then matched it towards a Northern Borders grant, and then what we did is we were getting ready to build out that portion of the project. The CARES Act money became available last year. And so we looked at another area of town that we had really kind of eyed on, and a connection to the university system. That was one of our big things, is we wanted to make a connection up to the university system to bring sort of research and development that comes out of the university into our municipal operations, our schools, and our businesses that wanted to partner with the university on research and development. So the CARES Act allowed us to do that. So we didn't go the route of bonding. Other communities have done that, and I think Chesterfield's a good example. Other communities out in the western part of the state, that's just not the direction we went in. It's just we went in this direction. So that's kind of how we went for funding. In addition to our grant opportunities, there's other grant opportunities that are out there, like the Economic Development Administration has been funding things. Of course, the American Rescue Plan, there's now broadband funding for the money that's coming to municipalities that can be utilized. And if there's an infrastructure bill, I'm sure there's going to be a whole lot of money there. USDA Rural Development has money as well. We're looking at USDA Rural Development, potentially their community facilities program, to help with cost of the drops. They will cover to some extent costs basically from the final pole into the home or into a business. And so we're looking at that potentially as an option. So there's a lot of different creative ways that you can go with this. And it's just really a matter of figuring out what your goal is and what your plans are, and then kind of matching that to those funding sources. I think the other thing that communities ought to really be thinking about is the mapping portion of this. And anybody who's kind of worked on broadband knows that the providers really don't provide what they have for maps and where they serve without an RFI process. And I won't go too deep into that because that's a long discussion and we have a short amount of time. Can definitely have that conversation offline. But in terms of mapping, the way we kind of looked at it is we took those maps that we did for cell coverage and started to understand what gaps were there. And then we started talking to businesses and community members. We did our own survey work to find out what people had and what their experiences were. And then we just started by just plotting things out on a Google map, just to kind of start showing our story. So I guess the key there is a lot of times communities and others will try to do a lot of planning ahead of time. And as a former planner, I mean, you absolutely need to do planning, but if you over plan something, you're never going to get anywhere, and you're going to get into that analysis paralysis issue. And so we really tried to be flexible and kind of get a good understanding of what was going on, what we wanted to do, and then execute, and then be ready to kind of move in a different direction if needed. The other thing that we really spent time on is what does the ownership look like? So that business plan portion of it, is this owned publicly? Is this owned privately? Is this a public-private partnership? And then we started thinking about, okay, not just ownership of the system, but operations and management. So we started to chart out what does that look like? Who's going to be responsible for operations and management? And then what we came to the conclusion of is that we felt it would be best to partner with an ISP, an internet service provider, in which we would start by owning the system and then work on some level of transfer of ownership while maintaining a level of control over our system, so that, again, we can control our destiny, so to speak, and really focusing in on having the internet service provider focus on the operations and management, because as a municipality, we're not going to be able to do operations and management of a system at our level of capability. So that was what drove our decision making in terms of our business plan, is what we landed on is a public-private partnership. So we're thinking through all those different things with the internet service providers that we're talking to right now. Another thing that I think is probably important is really the services that you want to provide. So again, we looked at this and we said, what are our key things? Well, we really want to make sure that we build this from an economic development perspective. So having it be available for businesses to tap into, either new businesses or existing businesses. So try to get to as many of those locations, and that kind of drove the mapping work that we did is, okay, where are those key corridors in town? Where are those key areas in town? Where some of the businesses exist. We also looked at, okay, where are some of those clusters of residences that exist that would be quote unquote easy to get to from the outset, and kind of a stratified plan on, okay, we'll focus on these neighborhoods first, get to the next neighborhood, and so on down the line. And then of course the municipal operations piece of it, really getting a good handle on that. We wanted to have a good internet service so that we can do things like smart cities, like LED lighting to, I know Kevin will probably talk about a community that's doing some really cool stuff with their, with music and in their downtown, to just being able to do a lot more things, like monitoring of our sewer and water system as an example. And then the other piece of this is really, again, that connection to that university system. So that was one of the other aspects that we really focused on. So I think in summary on that, I think it's just really good to make sure that you articulate what it is that you want to accomplish, and then kind of think through what you can accomplish based on what funding is available. Legislative support's really critical to this effort. Before we even started to apply for grants, we started to talk to our legislators at the state level and federal delegation on what we were trying to accomplish and trying to understand what funding was available. Could they help us with support letters? Could they keep us in the loop if other opportunities became available? And it's just really good to keep that open line of communications, because they may come up with some ideas that you hadn't thought of. And they also were able to help us get through some sticking points, some challenges with early in our process around working with the pole owners and helping us figure that out, which actually leads to the last piece of this that I would mention, is that partnerships are really key. We were able to get our CARES Act project built, which was a really super short timeline, because we had built a relationship with New Hampshire Electric Co-op early in the process before they were even thinking about broadband. We were talking to them about broadband years before, trying to get them to understand what we were trying to do and how we could work together. What that really helped us do was bring to bear our ability to get a bunch of the field work done at a very quick pace, a lot faster than we would have normally done had we not had that relationship. And we were able to get our CARES Act project built. And I think we were the only municipality in the state that actually did a CARES Act project, that got a complete CARES Act project completed. And that is in no small part because of the back work that we did with NHEC in that relationship. And then also internet service providers. So if we're going to go in that direction of a public-private partnership, you need a provider to provide that service. So that's a critical partnership to your work. So I guess I'll stop there and kick it over to Kevin and see what he wants to add that I haven't covered.
I think, Nick, you touched on a lot of the pieces here across the funding and the mapping stuff. I would just like to add too is, like, for example, coming on board with the project and now looking at other future grant funding to expand the network. A key piece of that again is mapping and looking at where you're looking to go. For say now we're looking at the phase 3, phase 4 piece of this through town is also having good estimates of what the design and construction costs and a good feel for what the make ready costs are, because that's what you're building for your grant funding, and how depending on the grant funding you're going after, that's where you have either the certain match pieces and everything. That ties back to the partnerships, as Nick is saying, is if you're working with an ISP, it's looking at how are they going to be a part of this going forward in the next funding vehicles that you're looking at. So that's just to kind of add to what he's spoken to. So a big thing for us is really understanding what the construction costs, knowing where you're going, having good mapping. And when we say mapping, it's not necessarily everybody's out there, because if we're building this, it's because they're not there, they're not providing the service anyway, right? So it's more the focus of what infrastructure can you use? Is it aerial? Is it buried? in, new underground versus existing underground, depending if it's downtown and such, and knowing those quantities and knowing what construction costs are and material costs that you have, and building a good solid, estimate that's going to be available for, what you're putting in for your funding focus. And then in regards to business plan, as Nick mentioned, it's another piece of looking of, ownership and who you're bringing on and how they can, have the best opportunity for their ROI by being part of it as well. Again, that ties back to the mention of the P3 and the legislative support. I think is a huge component through the years that I've been involved in broadband, since a lot of projects with EDA and all that being in the different ones, the ones that had the solid legislative support within the state and the areas had very good success. So I think that's another, as we have up there, a key component to it.
Right. And I think one of the things that I wanted to hit that I think is important is we were very conscious to bring in Kevin's company, X Squared, really early in the process. We had some ideas of what the design would look like, but ultimately bringing in a company to do that design and really kind of bring that technical expertise, and then the project management on the construction side is huge. I mean, we would have not been able to do this on our own by any stretch of the imagination. So having a partner like EX Squared is critical. To really getting your project going, because municipalities can only do so much, and to bring in folks who really understand how to do this stuff was a real big win for us at the early going. And we're looking at this as a relationship that's going to build from year on, from this year on, where we are going to be able to build out more, because we have that technical partner now that can help us kind of fact check things, ground check things, and really kind of come up with some good cost estimates, so that we can go out and find the funding and make the projects happen. So I guess that's it for this slide. I don't know, Jennifer, do you want to grab some of the questions, or do you want to just keep on going?
I think we'll keep on going. I am watching the chat, but I think we will have time at the end. But I just want to get through a couple more slides. So
Great.
for challenges, so once a community is underway with a broadband project, what kind of trouble spots or challenges might they expect to face?
Yeah, this has definitely been
Something you could do up early.
Yeah, exactly. I'd say make sure that you have lots of Advil available to you, especially early in your process. Like I said, we kind of jumped on the broadband wagon before really it was a thing in New Hampshire, in terms of this latest iteration. I mean, there was a lot of talk sort of like Kevin said, sort of in 08, 09, 2010, but it kind of never got to that next phase and sort of fizzled. And so we realized that broadband was pretty early, but it was before sort of this, everybody's talking about it now. And so we were kind of charting some territory that didn't exist, and especially without the bonding authority, that was a whole other challenge unto itself. But to that point, and I'm hopeful that the headaches that I've given myself will hopefully alleviate any headaches that future communities don't have to go through, so that we can hopefully you guys can take away some things today that we learned that you don't have to replicate. But I think, in terms of funding, anybody who's lived in New Hampshire for any amount of time is town meeting, right? So going to town meeting and making the case to voters that this is something that's important that we have to do. And we did convince our voters, and we made our warrant article that asking for funding contingent upon receiving a grant. So no money was going to be expended on this project until we got grant to match that appropriation from the voters. So you have to make a good case, like you do at town meeting every year. And then of course grant dollars. It's the time to actually go out and get the grant dollars to find where those grants exist, to find out if you qualify, to write the grants. That all takes time and effort and energy. Which again goes back to the concept of partnerships. I mean, one of this most recent grant round that we're working on, we are leaning very heavily on our partners to help us look at what makes sense from a funding perspective for grants, and how we how we structure that conversation on those grant applications. So again, partnerships are really key to this effort. Agreements, the big thing that I think probably is the biggest hurdle that we hit was the pole attachments is understanding, what exactly we're getting ourselves into with the pole attachments. We didn't have the technical experience to really navigate those pole attachment agreements. We brought our town attorney in, and luckily he's got a lot of experience with telecom, so he helped us navigate that. But some of the challenges that we faced there were around insurance requirements. The level of insurance that was required was pretty significant, and that held up our project for a very long time. And it got to the point where we were probably a few days from pulling the plug on the project last year because we just weren't able to get that insurance squared away until we finally figured out some of the ways in which we could do it in combination with our current insurance provider, and then having to go out and then bond on another carrier, and then also getting general liability from another carrier. So what I would say about that is, in terms of pole attachment agreements, be realistic about what you expect. We kind of went in pretty early and we thought, oh, these pole attachment agreements, we'll make amendments to them that will be to our desire and our flavor. And the pole owners basically said, yeah, no dice, no way. The pole attachment agreement is the attachment agreement, and that's the way it's going to be. Take it or leave it. So we had to sort of adjust our expectations and kind of go accordingly based on those expectations. Insurance, I talked a little bit about again. That's going to be a real thing that you're going to have to jump through, which is, most towns in the state of New Hampshire have Primex as their provider. And so there was a lot of conversation with Primex around how do we insure this program from a workers' comp perspective, from an auto insurance perspective, a general liability perspective. And, ultimately we came up with sort of a hybrid insurance approach for the construction piece of it. On the longer term, where the ISPs that we're currently talking to, that's one of the key conversations around, okay, who's going to insure it? How is it going to be insured? What level? That be ready for that. Those are definitely some things that you're going to have to talk through quite a bit. And then the last thing is competing goals. So for example, in Bristol, we're a smaller community. We are all, like many smaller communities, we're wrestling with how do we grow the tax base to keep the taxes at a reasonable level, but also maintaining the character of our community and making sure that we don't overgrow. And so we want to make sure that we're kind of always having that discussion. And then some of the other things, in terms of competing goals, it's what I talked about earlier. It's sort of, the incumbents, so the existing companies that are out there, the internet service providers, and what they want to provide and what they feel that they can provide. We had a lot of conversation around with the current internet service provider in town around, well, look, you don't need to do this. We already provide this service, and the conversation is really, no, you don't actually. What our competing goal there was, we knew what we wanted to achieve, and really kind of having those conversations with those incumbents around, if you can't provide it, we're going out on our own. And so again, that we had to keep our focus on what we wanted to accomplish and what we were trying to provide. And then I guess the last thing I'll just say regarding competing goals is ultimately we are kind of looking at a couple different internet service providers. We haven't made a decision yet. But it's really important to find a provider that matches your goals, and have mutual goals, because otherwise you're going to end up recreating the wheel that you've already created that already exists from the cable company in town. So, that was kind of a really important for us as we've been going through our interview process, finding an internet service provider that really bought into our mission and vision. So, I don't know, Kevin, what else is important?
I mean, touching back on just the agreements and stuff, and the insurance was a key one, and having that in place, being that's the area. The other thing would be is knowing other needs that you may have from a permitting aspect. Every town and every area is different. Even though things are aerial, you may have water crossings and things of that nature that, there could be other permitting requirements that may be out there from agencies like Army Corps of Engineers, and having some of that knowledge ahead of time knows, because that's your long lead items in a project schedule. So you have to have those built in and understand that that's going to be the ones you have to build around and focus on, and see where you can build all your other pieces and how that could be a gap in play. So in regards to how that worked here, having that relationship with NHEC really helped in the area that we needed in relation to the CARES Act funding, and having that partnership. And the other pole assets being owned by Eversource and CCI in joint use for phase 2 and the municipal component here in town. We got on that right away, but we knew that was going to be the longer lead item through the application process. And building the relationship in there and keeping that dialogue moving to make sure that the make ready is happening. And as you get through each phase, from the application going in and the surveys, the poll surveys that happen, and then finding out the make ready, and then the process for that, and then finally getting the licensing. So that's been it's a tough process that's been there for a long time. I've been dealing with it for my 27 years, and that's probably been well before that. So understanding that, and that kind of falls into the competing goals, because you're up there trying to focus in your area, and they're also, managing their piece, as well as other third-party assets that are going up on the polls as well. So having that knowledge, but I would say, Nick nailed it too about the insurance, because that was a big thing, and it's a different thing that a town is looking at as well. So.
All right.
You want to hit the next slide? Jennifer, this next slide, we can be really quick, because I think we've covered a lot of it, and I'll be happy to jump into the questions right after this.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
So we've talked about some of the challenges, but what are some of the successes from all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, a new future for Bristol is exactly right. I mean, I think, COVID has taught us a lot about the need for infrastructure beyond just roads and bridges and water and sewer, that internet plays a really huge component to a community success. And so thankfully we've been planning well before COVID for COVID times and post-COVID times. So we're going to have a lot more resilient community that we're going to be able to kind of weather the next storm and really kind of move forward as a community. There's been a couple articles written about us about how we want to become technology corridor, just even without even having finished the final construction of this next phase of our project. We've already gotten one tech company here, and we've got another tech company that's looking very seriously at Bristol. And so we're creating jobs, and that's real sort of good stuff for communities to be able to have new jobs, well-paying jobs that are going to help support the local economy and keep the tax base strong. Of course, drives property value. So really important. That's what people are deciding now when they're looking at building or coming to a community is do you have broadband or not, or what level of broadband do you have, and the value of your property is increased because you have it. So we're going to have a much more valuable community, which is a good thing, again, from a tax base and revenue generation perspective. And we're going to have really good, solid municipal services. So we have a water and sewer department. And Kevin can probably speak to this a little bit better than I can, but we'll be able to do a lot more monitoring of our water and sewer system, as an example, through this broadband system, because our assets will be connected, versus having to send somebody down a manhole to do an inspection, or get called out on a weekend for something. We're also looking at a wireless solution at our transfer station, and how we provide cameras and things like that for employee safety. So just from a municipal services perspective, being able to kind of protect our employees and to be more efficient with our time. And then, other things within our operations of not having to wait for the internet connection to work. Like, we'll have an internet connection that will work, and it will work quickly, and we'll be able to do our jobs without having to wait, and we won't have any downtime. And that's really key, especially from a fire and police perspective, to be able to have internet service and cell coverage that works and works reliably. And that's, you can't ask for anything more than that. And that's the same thing on the community perspective. Businesses want that. The other thing that I'll just touch on is that this has helped us to grow some partnerships that we've been talking about. So Tenny Mountain has they're building a sort of a science center there for creation of technology and STEM jobs, and our network is going to be plugged in with them. So we're going to be really focused in on the job growth up there, and again, creating jobs for local people here, high paying jobs for local people here, and training for those jobs through that partnership, and through a partnership with Plymouth State and the university system to really get people trained up and get them into those jobs that are being created here. And really kind of creating a lot more dynamic community because of it, bringing people here who have really who really want to help the community grow in a good way. And the last partnership that's really important is the internet service provider. It will be good to have an internet service provider who we can partner with, that understands our goals and will help us grow as a community and really serve the needs of our community and our residents and our businesses in a way that we expect, not just, here's what we offer, take it or leave it. So, I think that's having a partner that's going to help us really do that is going to be key. So.
And just to add to what Nick was saying, I know he touched on the network stuff, but I mean, from the success standpoint, with the residential commercial, again, with the ISPs, it's creating competition, and not just competition, say from a price point standpoint, but it's providing the ability to have symmetrical broadband in the area, higher quality, better customer service, all those key components that, residents and commercial entities are looking for. In regards to his network, he has fiber that goes right down through downtown, and that's going to, not just provide the commercial connections and support the, revenue generation, say from the ISP standpoint, but it will also provide him the ability to do the things such as, Wi-Fi downtown, smart lighting and things, because we're literally going through the conduit system that his lighting is connected to. So that's just a piece. And again, as he mentioned, even the sewer water, we're connecting to their facilities and bringing that on, so he can have real-time monitoring of the data of the SCADA system, which again, just helps in knowing if there's a problem early enough on, as compared to having somebody out or being reactive. It now becomes more of a preventative maintenance, or even being looking ahead. So it'll really help from a municipal services standpoint, and the scalability is there for future. We're working on a smart city down in Virginia, and it's a small town, and it has various things from traffic counters for the bike path that goes through there for pedestrian and bicycle traffic, all the way down to for parking. They have small cell support in the area as well through the fiber network, and street lighting, LED, and as Nick mentioned, even down the point at Christmas where they're able to use the call boxes and they can put the music out for holiday music. So again, just various scalable situations that a town can use for services by having the broadband in the area. So that's all I have to add. And the only other thing I'd add is, just so everybody knows, that photo there is actually in Bristol, and is a portion of the backbone fiber being placed back in December of last year.
Yep. So it's a great, I think it's a great example. You can remain rural, but also have the creature comforts of good internet.
All right, great. So we have about 8 chat questions, and I know we do have somebody with their hand raised.
Okay, fire away.
So this is Jess Edwards in Auburn, and I am trying to better understand your comments relative to needing to make sure that your goals are aligned with the ISP providers. Could you go another level or two in depth on what sort of goals that you had or have that seemed incompatible, and how, and whether or not you think you're going to find the compatibility you seek?
So the answer to the second question is yes. And I would say that the goals are really about providing a level of service beyond the bare minimum. The current provider is a cable company, which is basically the sort of 10-1, 25-3 standard, and we're finding that people just aren't even getting that, and that's just that's not conducive necessarily to distance learning for kids, to remote working for people who are working down in Boston who have got higher end jobs that are living here and working down there. So it's the consistent offerings, the higher the speeds at reasonable cost. I mean, our goal was one of our main goals was cost control and better service. And both the final companies that we're talking to, both are going to be able to provide that level of service that we're looking for. And then I would say also responsiveness. I think really important, good customer service. It feels that the companies that we've talked to really understand what we're trying to accomplish from a customer service perspective in terms of what level, what types of internet should be provided, the speeds, the response times. I don't know anything else there I think those are the things that we were really trying to focus in on, and we feel confident that we're going to be able to exceed our current provider.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right.
Jennifer, do you want to jump into those questions that are in the chat?
Yep. So there's mention of the National Telecommunication and Information Administration, how they released a notice of funding opportunity yesterday for $288 million in grant funding for deployment of broadband infrastructure. And the question was, will you be applying for that grant?
Don't know yet. I'll have to take a look, but if the money's available, we'll certainly look at it.
Yeah, and it is breaking news because it was released yesterday. But applications are due August 17th.
Yeah, there was a bunch of money that became available as part of the December omnibus. That rules are just getting released and grant programs are just being released now. I mean, there's a flood of money, so there's that, and then there's that NTIA is probably part of that. There's also, of course, the rescue plan dollars that are coming to the municipalities where broadband is an activity that's allowable to be used. And then if there's an infrastructure bill, there's also appropriations requests that are coming out that are due tomorrow. So yeah, it's hard to keep an eye on it, but whatever money we can try and find our way to get our hands on, we will.
Yeah. All right. And then there was just a comment about how Bristol has a much higher population density compared to some other smaller towns in New Hampshire, like Atworth.
Yes and no. I mean, I think we function like a larger city in our downtown, but we're pretty spaced out. I mean, I mean that picture is a perfect example. That's not just a one-off picture. I mean, there are other areas of our town where that's significant. And I don't know, Kevin can speak to that more.
I mean, in regards to that, I mean, that's a good question too. I mean, in regards to some projects, I know in my past, separate of Bristol, being involved in some of the old NTIA era funding projects like down in Massachusetts, just south of here with the NBI network that was touching on all the towns and having customer anchor institutions where they're coming to town and bringing the fiber in. And then the towns were going to be the focus for the last mile. And again, that was built in 2013, and towns are still getting added on there from developing municipal light plants or not. But I do know there was one town we were working with. We did the actual network equipment component of it. But Mount Washington, which is a very small town, I think it's about 145 residents. And I had met with them early on, even when the NBI project was starting, and they ended up building their network out. They did get a grant and they did some match level. And I don't remember the 100% particulars, but they did get some grant funding that came through the NBI program after that network was built, because then they were giving out grants pieces. They didn't go the route of a municipal light plant. They actually got a waiver on that. But again, it was 145 residents. They built it out. I think they did something with some of it might have been a portion with their tax base. And then I think depending on the resident, there was they would sign up for a 3-year or $300 input in. And that one was used a third-party ISP provider like Nick is doing, that they had who's operating and maintenance. So again, that was a small town, and they had the wherewithal to come up with a way to structure the deal to build out the network. And yeah, it's up and running, and it's been successful.
All right, so how many miles of fiber will you be deploying?
We're roughly approximately 24 miles of fiber, and in the initial residential area, there's probably in the 400 to 500 residents in that area.
Yep.
Okay, and then another one, when do you expect to turn up the network?
Well, it's just a matter of pushing the button. So we're just finishing up the last pieces of the pole attachments, and I think that's probably over the next month.
We're looking late June to early July. Again, as you heard me mention, that the pole attachments are that's the battle you deal with on a daily basis through the project, but we're on target to be done late June, early July.
Okay, so the next one is related to taxes on the town. Have you determined what the initial installation expenses and ongoing maintenance expenses impact will be on individual taxes in the town in terms of % of increase?
So that's going to be in partnership with the internet service provider. So, we're talking to a couple of providers right now. We're kind of getting to the last pieces of it and having those discussions around what's going to, what are their sort of costs on the drop, and, having that conversation around, well, if we're providing you guys a $2 million worth of network, are you willing to essentially waive the cost for the drops into the home? And so, that's, and these guys have standard rates, and we're looking at, okay, how do we minimize that cost for the residents? Or eliminate that cost for the residents. So that's a discussion point that we're having right now with the provider. And then the operations and management of it is going to be on the provider.
You had mentioned some legislatures helped you with the Bristol project through the process. Which legislatures helped you along with that process?
So just our local senator, Senator Bob Guida, and also, we're in constant communication with the Shaheen's office and Hassan's office and Annie Custer's office.
What % of Bristol's 911 addresses already had at least one wired broadband access before your project?
I don't have that number in front of me. I can get back to you if that's something that you really want to know.
We have a couple more in the chat, but I know we have somebody with their hand raised. Molly, did you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yeah, I had a couple quick questions. Who's your grant writer? Do you have somebody on staff? Who did you use?
You're talking to him.
And that was you just kind of experience writing them from the past? Is this Kevin now I'm talking to?
No, Nick.
Nick. I'm pointing to Nick.
Okay. How about, do you have any advice? I'm in Hancock. We're a town that has 27% unserved, which is not a great ratio in terms of appealing to ISPs. We're kind of this donut last mile problem. Any advice for how we figure out how to appeal to them or get federal money for a town that is served more than unserved, but the unserved are terrifically unserved?
Well, I mean, each grant program has a narrative that they like to see, so some focus on economic development, others focus in on rural connectivity, and others, there's telehealth aspects. So my advice to you would be to identify potential grant funders, and then identify what your real challenges are that you want to solve, and then try and find that challenge. So we came from an economic development perspective, predominantly, and sort of schooling, remote schooling, and remote work. And so that's kind of how we attack the issue. And so we went after dollars that way.
Okay, and last question, sorry. Can you put up the information for X Squared? Is that what your company's called?
Yes, I think the next slide actually has Kevin's and my contact information. Yep.
Oh, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so we have about 3 more minutes left before it's 1 o'clock. There is a question about, do you see an opportunity to work together instead of all towns competing with each other for money, resources, and working independently?
Sure.
Yeah, I would say yes. I think there's, if you can put things into a region, and then there's a balance of how large that is. Because the more it can get too large, I've seen where they try to get too many areas in one, and you're not able to stay on point with, again, then you get the competing goals in a different way. But it does make sense where you can build out a region, because then that takes, if there's a town with 145 and the next one over has the 2,000, and you build a couple, a regional component of a certain size, have the same focus and goals, then you're able to work with, like how Nick's working with an ISP, to have that ability to come in, and then that builds that business case better.
Yeah, there's an element of regionalism with our project as it is, because we are making a connection up to Plymouth State, and then there's kind of so we have an IRU in place, and then after the IRU there's so IRU is a lease, and then after the IRU there's some components of in another community that we could definitely be talking to you about, and then I as the Grafton County Committee Chair, I mean, that's exactly what we're doing, is we're looking at how does the county work together in coordination with the municipalities and providers to build out a network that's across the county and not just in one location, not just one town. And if you wanted to learn more about that approach, I would just go to the Grafton County website, and you can see you'll see a link on the side that says Broadband Committee, and then you'll see all of our meeting minutes and our presentations that you can learn more about. Jennifer, I have time if you wanted to go over. I don't know if folks want to, but I don't mind sticking a couple minutes after and answering questions. I mean, I'm happy to, if people want to stay on and keep on listening and asking questions. So it's up to you, however you want to keep going on this.
Yep, I think I have at least one more chat question that just came in. It was, do you have a target service offering? Parentheses, speed and price points.
Yeah, I mean, when we wrote our grants, we said that the network's got to be at a minimum 1 gig symmetrical. So 1 gig up, 1 gig down.
100 meg.
And then in terms of the sweet spot, sort of 100 meg symmetrical. And then, when we have interviewed these providers, we've asked them for their offerings and their costs. And basically we'll see where it all goes, depending on who we choose and what we can drive for conversation.
All right. There was a follow-up to that Bristol 911 addresses that had at least one wired broadband. That said, do you have a close idea of how much of the town already had broadband access? Was it 90%? Again, I don't know if you need to circle back on this one or not.
Yeah, somewhere
around there.
Yes, the area that we focused on with the CARES Act was an RDOF area, and so that's that like 500 plus minus residences. So RDOF basically defines unserved or underserved. So that was one of the key pieces of it. I think there's one other RDOF area, and I can't tell you how many residences are in there, but that area will be served by the backbone network that we've built. And then beyond that, the data gets down to the county level in terms of official data, which is I believe Grafton County is at like 91, 92%. But I think that the critical thing to this is that when the providers talk about 25.3 or 10.1, it's important to remember that it's an advertised speed versus an actual delivered speed. So they will say that they provide 25.3, but it's not necessarily that it's actually being delivered at 25.3. It's only that it's advertised at 25.3. So what we found a lot of is that, that people were getting advertised at those speeds, but they weren't actually getting delivered. So were they covered, so to speak, by the federal definition? Yes, but were they actually getting it? No.
All right. I don't see any more questions in the chat, and I don't see any hands raised at this point. So I guess we'll do a last call for any questions. Otherwise, you've provided your information up on the screen there as to how to contact you both. So with nothing coming in at the moment, I guess we'll do wrap this up. Thank you, Nick and Kevin, very much for this great presentation. It provided a lot of great information. We did get one last question about providing a sample of the survey you send out to residents.
Yeah, I just have to figure out how to convert that. It's a Google form. I just need to get with my tech people, figure that out.
So maybe they can circle back with you and follow up on that.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, and thank you everybody for joining us for our monthly webinar series. We will be back again June 17th for our next one. So stay tuned for an announcement about that. And thank you again, everybody, and hope you all have a great day.